Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome to 5th Method Percentage Communication Philosophy. This presentation will be delivered by me and 3 of my friends. My name is Rahma Azara, person numbers is 38, and my friends Andika Rizky Pratama, person numbers is 6, Joseph Abner, person numbers is 23, and the last, Nabila Khalisa Fauzi, present numbers is 31.
When viewed from a resolutely rhetorical point of view, semiotics turns out to be a philosophy of communication in a rather profound sense of the word. Peirce's theory of sign can be interpreted differently, but it doesn't change the argument that for some purpose one can exclude the experiential grounds of Pearson's sign and epistemological result. One critic argues that the rhetorical approach is pragmatic, while the rhetorical approach shouldn't be understood as a fundamentalist enterprise. One benefit is that it underpins Pearson's sign theory and general experience, providing a much-needed counterweight to formalistic tendencies in semiotics. The rhetorical perspective influenced the semiotic outlook in many complex and often subtle ways. In other words, semiosis can be characterized as the type of activity or process that distinguishes signs from other kinds of activities or processes. Peirce's definition of semiosis is found in pragmatism. A typical mode of semiotic action can be characterized by representative action. This suggests that the semiotic concept of sign requires a replacement theory. Peirce often interpreted signs as substitutes for objects. A sign can be defined as something that truly represents or represents something. Representation is a character to produce certain mental effects and can replace other things. Something that has this character is called a representamen. Mental effects or thoughts are called objects. Looking at the problem from a rhetorical point of view, representations are agreeably too narrow to capture some sign functions. Perhaps the representation is technical, which includes all kinds of sign actions, but it cannot represent the result because it tends to lead to misunderstanding.
Dynamic of the object. The object defines a sign. The relationship between object and sign should not be interpreted too narrowly and should not be understood as a strict relationship. Objects are marks that will on objects. A series of representation may have an absolute object at its boundary. However, absolute objects are more logically inferred semiotic than experienced in reality. It is therefore possible that a set of signs need not draw anything but the system to explain representation and determination. The object becomes intersystem. Signs can only function and internal objects. Internal or direct objects depend on the passive sign, whereas external or dynamic objects are corresponding objects that feel independent of the sign and are active. An external or dynamic object can be defined as an object effect by a sign or as a reality, which in some way is made to determine its representational sign. Internal objects depend on representation in a sign which may be false, but real objects do not depend on representation. This is what guarantees the truth as a basic reference. The dynamic aspect of the object refers to the determinative role the object plays.
Purposive tendencies. To make semiotic action look more real is by reformulating the question and investigating the driving force that provides an alleged semiosis in the possible purpose of the character being directed. Ransdell argues that the existence of objects, signs, and translator or human agents will suffice in a puristic analysis. According to Ransdell's point of view, signs have the power to produce interpretation. Seen from this point of view, it is not the interpreter that produces the interpretation, but the signs that produce the interpretation. The semiotic object is a complete, correct, and ideal interpretation of the sign. What is meant by every sign has an object is that every process of sign interpretation tends toward a final causal form. This final state is the goal of the semiosis process. Peirce's theological view of semiosis is that semiosis coexists with a certain kind of goal-directed process, namely acting for a purpose. All interpretation of sign has a purpose, and the acts of purpose interpret signs. According to Short, semiosis relies on interpretation, which means that each sign's action is only relevant in relation to the goals and effort of some sign users. This purpose is not given in the relationship of the sign itself.
Interpretative effects. Determination of semiotics is not limited to the determination of an object of a sign, but a sign that also determines what that is innovative, called Peirce as an interpreter. For Peirce, user is defined as any form whatsoever, which became an intermediary between a object and a translator, because both are determined by the objects relative to interpretant, and determines the interpretant in reference to the object. So, in such causing, the interpreter is determined by the object by mediation sign of this. Characterization of it is the result of randomization communicative of components, semiotic of the speaker and the interpreter. But the determination of this is a little puzzling because Peirce's theory grounds slow. Semiosis will not stop even if the understanding has been found by the interpreter. Even Peirce claims that the chain of determination is infinite. If a time commentator is successful to end this, then the understanding rendered not perfect. Other than that, Peirce often expresses that interpretation is in common with interpreting. Roman Jacobson discovered that the view is quite correct, and concluded semiotic means having a sense of user to the system user to another. According to Peirce, about semiotic involve a thesis that semiotic are not limited is very disturbing. This issue was often discussed in several discussions, but not a single consensus was agreed upon. Even structural understanding cannot be accepted. Peirce stated something in his letter to Welby. Peirce explained that the interpreter does not have to be cognitive in terms of provision. We take that interpretation was not a thought, but better to be a treatment or experience, even can be summed up as a quality of a feeling. In another statement, it is mentioned that looking through dichotomy that mentioned previously as a shape as the first, second, and third. Then about trichotomy, which both show the interpreter that emotion can be categorized as a sign. Peirce also reveals some of the description are much better, like how he studied the emotional interpreter and what that is put forward. Then it will be each associated with what are made. Following the argument of the statement, all committed to the same conclusion. Albert revealed that in the settlement, he said that we must allow interpretation of the end of the mark, although not relatively the same from what we interpreted by the same sign before. From the angle of view of pragmatics, things can be only thought of elite interpreters, which has of all the best. Almost all semiosis can be built in order to tend towards correction of the formation of the tradition or habit. Wait from any context of the original, that is, if the determination is a sign that is from the interpretation that are combined and loaded in one sentence, it can be said that a result of habit is a phrase that more appropriate as an alternative.
Transmission and transparency. According to Greenlee 1973, what will represent a sign of mediator function. According to Colapietro, mediation will be a better term than representation to characterize the sign of function. Mediation means a sign that mediates between an object and its interpreter, while representation shows a sign that represents an object to an interpreter. Representation tends to be limiting and opposed to mediation. What is important is process is how to deliver a sign so that it can determine meaning through mediation with transparency. The purpose of this process is to show the truth.